The massive crystal structure floated silently in space, held between three purple moons. Inside its glowing walls, hundreds of young aliens from across the galaxy studied the most dangerous subject of all, the power of the mind. Daeho pressed his silver-scaled face against the viewing window of his dormitory room. Below him, the Academy's training halls buzzed with mental energy. Students from dozens of different worlds practiced moving objects with their thoughts, sharing memories across vast distances, and reading each other's deepest secrets without saying a word. He had been at Nexus Academy for 3 years now, ever since the destruction of his home moon. The Xanthari people were known throughout the galaxy for their natural telepathic gifts, and Daeho was considered one of the most promising students his species had ever produced. His test scores were perfect. His mental barriers were stronger than students twice his age. The instructors whispered that he might become the youngest graduate in Academy history, but none of that mattered today. Today was different. Today was the day before the annual mind probe test. Daeho shivered, his scales turning a darker shade of silver. Every student knew about the test. It was the Academy's most sacred and terrifying tradition. Once a year, all eligible students faced the mind probe nexus, an ancient device created by the first telepathic masters thousands of years ago. The probe would dive deep into their consciousness, testing not just their power but their ability to survive having their mind completely exposed and examined. Many students did not survive it intact. The lucky ones simply failed and were sent home. The unlucky ones spent the rest of their lives in the Academy's medical wing, their minds shattered beyond repair. But those who passed emerged stronger than they had ever imagined possible. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Daeho turned to see Sojin floating in his doorway, her blue Vorthak skin glowing faintly with the emotional energy she absorbed from everyone around her. Her species were natural empaths, feeling the pain and joy of others as if it were their own. "You are scared," she said simply, her voice carrying the musical quality all Vorthak possessed. "I can feel it from 3 rooms away." Daeho tried to smile. "Everyone is scared before the test. Even you." Sojin drifted closer, her large eyes filled with concern. "My fear is different. I am afraid of feeling what happens to the others when they break." "Your fear is deeper. You are afraid the probe will find something you have hidden, even from yourself." Before Daeho could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway. Taemin strode in without permission, his red Nexari skin pulsing with the aggressive energy his species was known for. The Nexari prided themselves on mental dominance above all else. They believed that the strongest minds should rule the galaxy, and they had little patience for weakness. "Still worrying about tomorrow?" Taemin asked with a sneer. "The probe only breaks weak minds. Those of us with true power have nothing to fear." Sojin's skin flickered with annoyance. "Arrogance will not protect you from the probe, Taemin. It sees through all lies, especially the ones we tell ourselves." Taemin laughed, but there was a sharp edge to the sound. "My people have been taking the probe test for centuries. We know how to prepare the mind for invasion. The key is to maintain absolute mental discipline and never show weakness." "Is that what your parents taught you?" Daeho asked quietly. Taemin's red skin darkened, and for a moment his mental barriers flickered. Through the gap, both Daeho and Sojin caught a flash of something unexpected. Shame, deep and burning. "My parents taught me to be strong," Taemin said, his voice tight. "Unlike some species, we do not coddle our children or tell them that weakness is acceptable." The 3 students stood in uncomfortable silence. Tomorrow they would all face the same test. Tomorrow, they would all have their deepest secrets exposed to the ancient minds that lived within the probe. Tomorrow, some of them might not survive. A new presence appeared in the hallway outside Daeho's room. All 3 students immediately straightened, feeling the vast ancient consciousness approaching. Master Baksu had arrived. The master no longer had a physical body. Centuries ago, he had transcended flesh and now existed as pure thought within a floating crystal housing. The crystal was beautiful and terrifying, pulsing with colors that had no names in any spoken language. When he communicated, his words appeared directly in their minds, carrying emotions and concepts that speech could never convey. "Students," his mental voice was like wind through distant stars. "I sense your anxiety about tomorrow's test. This is natural and expected, but I have come to share news that will require all of your mental flexibility. The three young aliens exchanged glances. Master Baksu rarely visited students directly unless something important was happening. Tomorrow you will not be the only ones taking the test, the master continued. We have received a new student, one unlike any we have ever admitted to this academy. Taemin stepped forward, his natural aggression making him speak before thinking. What species, master? Surely any being advanced enough to study here would have some telepathic ability. The crystal pulsed with what might have been amusement. That is precisely what makes this situation so unusual. This new student comes from a species called humans. They appear to have no telepathic abilities whatsoever. Sojin gasped, her empathic nature making her immediately concerned for any being that seemed vulnerable. Master, how can a non-telepathic species learn here? How would they even communicate with the other students? These are excellent questions, Master Baksu replied. The humans are a young species, recently discovered on the outer rim of the galaxy. They communicate through sound vibrations and written symbols. Their minds appear completely closed to telepathic contact. Yet they have requested admission to our academy, and the Galactic Council has approved their application as part of a cultural exchange program. Daeho felt a chill run through his scales. A mind that could not be read was almost unimaginable to him. How could you trust someone whose thoughts you could not sense? How could you truly know them? What is their name, Master? Sojin asked. The human goes by Jiwoo. They will arrive tonight and begin classes immediately. They have specifically requested to take the mind probe test with the rest of you tomorrow. Taemin's skin flared bright red with indignation. Master, surely this is madness. The probe was designed for telepathic minds. We have no idea what it might do to a species without mental defenses. The crystal rotated slowly, casting strange shadows on the walls. You are correct that we do not know what will happen. The probe has never encountered a truly non-telepathic consciousness. Our ancient records speak of minds that resist the probe, but never of minds that cannot connect to it at all. Then why allow it? Daeho asked. Why risk harming this human? Because, Master Baksu said, and his mental voice carried centuries of wisdom and curiosity. True understanding comes only through exploration of the unknown. This human Jiwoo may teach us something new about the nature of consciousness itself, or they may be destroyed by an experience their mind was never designed to handle. The master's crystal began to drift away, but his voice remained in their minds. Rest well tonight, students. Tomorrow you will face not only the probe, but also your first encounter with a form of intelligence that may be completely unlike your own. As the ancient presence faded, the three students stood in the growing darkness of Daeho's room. Outside the window, the three purple moons cast their light on the academy's crystal walls. And somewhere in the depths of the structure, the mind probe nexus waited for tomorrow's victims. A human, Sojin whispered, a mind that cannot be read. How do you suppose they think? How do they feel emotions without sharing them? It does not matter, Taemin said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. If they are weak enough to have no mental defenses, they will be destroyed quickly. The probe will barely notice them. But Daeho stared out at the stars and wondered if Taemin was right. Something about this situation felt different. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the usual fears about the probe test. Tomorrow they would all face the ancient device that had broken so many minds before them, but now they would do it alongside a being whose thoughts were a complete mystery. He pressed his face against the cool crystal of the window and tried not to think about what morning would bring. Jiwoo had never felt so alone in a room full of people. The humans sat in the back corner of advanced telepathic theory class, watching dozens of alien students effortlessly share complex mathematical concepts through pure thought. Professor Hyejin, a tall being with crystalline skin that reflected the thoughts of others, gestured toward a floating hologram of interconnected minds. As you can see, the professor's mental voice touched every student except Jiwoo. When consciousness networks properly, the combined intelligence becomes exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. Jiwoo raised a hand. The simple movement caused several students to turn and stare. Physical gestures for communication seemed primitive and strange to them. Professor, Jiwoo said aloud, the sound waves making some of the more sensitive telepaths wince. Could you explain that part about consciousness networking? I didn't receive the mental transmission. A ripple of amusement passed through the class. Some students tried to hide their laughter, but telepaths were not good at concealing emotions from each other. Only Jiwoo remained unaware of the mockery. protected by the same inability to read minds that made learning so difficult. Professor Heejin's crystalline features shifted to show patience, though Jiwoo could not see the teacher's true feelings reflected there. Of course, Jiwoo. When multiple telepathic minds link together, they can share processing power, memory storage, and creative inspiration. What one mind cannot solve alone, 10 minds can accomplish easily. But how do you maintain individual identity? Jiwoo asked. If everyone's thoughts are connected, how do you know which ideas are your own? The question created an uncomfortable silence. Several students exchanged mental comments that Jiwoo could not hear. The concept of losing individual identity was not something telepathic species worried about. Their minds had evolved with natural barriers that protected their core self while allowing connection with others. Individual identity is maintained through practice and discipline, Professor Hyejin said finally. Perhaps this concept is difficult for your species to understand because humans have never experienced true mental connection. After class, Jiwoo walked alone through the academy's crystal corridors. Other students moved in groups, their minds linked in constant subtle communication. They could share jokes, warnings, and emotions without making a sound. Jiwoo heard only footsteps in the hum of the academy's power systems. 3 weeks had passed since Jiwoo's arrival, and the human still felt like a stranger in a world of shared consciousness. Basic telepathic exercises that came naturally to children of other species remained impossible. When classmates tried to read Jiwoo's thoughts, they reported feeling like they were trying to see through thick fog. When Jiwoo attempted to project thoughts outward, nothing happened at all, but there were things Jiwoo could do that amazed the others. In technical systems class, while other students struggled to understand the academy's complex machinery through telepathic interface, Jiwoo could simply look at a broken device and somehow know what was wrong with it. The human's approach to problem-solving seemed chaotic and random to telepathic minds, but it produced results. When Professor Dalsu presented the class with a navigation puzzle that required finding a path through a maze of hostile alien territories, the telepathic students worked together to mentally map every possible route and calculate the optimal solution. Jiwoo stared at the holographic display for 10 minutes, then traced a path with one finger that somehow avoided every danger while reaching the destination in record time. How did you know to go that way? Daeho had asked afterward. The Zenthari student had been watching Jiwoo with growing curiosity. I don't know, Jiwoo admitted. I just felt like it was right, like the pattern was telling me something. Now walking toward the evening meal, Jiwoo noticed Daeho, Sojin, and Tae-min sitting together at their usual table. Most alien students avoided Jiwoo, unsure how to interact with someone whose thoughts they could not read. But these three had begun to show interest in the human's strange way of thinking. Jiwoo approached their table, carrying a tray of food that looked nothing like anything from Earth. The other students had learned to communicate their likes and dislikes directly to the food preparation systems through telepathic interface. Jiwoo had to point at things and hope for the best. May I sit with you? Jiwoo asked. Sojin immediately gestured to an empty chair, her blue skin glowing with welcome. The Vorthak empath could not read Jiwoo's emotions directly, but she seemed to sense something in the human's body language and voice tone that others missed. Of course, she said. We were just discussing tomorrow's test. Jiwoo felt a familiar chill. The mind probe test. Every student talked about it, but no one would explain exactly what happened during the examination. Jiwoo had tried to research it in the Academy's database, but most of the files were stored in telepathic formats that required mental access to understand. Are you nervous? Daeho asked. His silver scales had been darker than usual for the past few days, and Jiwoo had learned to recognize this as a sign of stress in his species. I don't really know what to expect, Jiwoo admitted. Everyone says it's dangerous, but no one will tell me why. Taemin leaned forward, his red skin pulsing with aggressive energy. Despite his often hostile attitude, he seemed fascinated by Jiwoo's mental blindness. The probe reads everything, he said. Every thought, every memory, every fear you have ever tried to hide. It pushes your mind to its breaking point to see how much you can handle before you shatter. But I don't have telepathic abilities, Jiwoo said. How can it read thoughts I can't even share? The three aliens exchanged glances. This was the question that had been bothering them all. The mind probe was designed to test telepathic minds, What would it do to a consciousness it could not properly access? Maybe it will be easier for you, Sojin suggested hopefully. If the probe cannot read your thoughts, perhaps it cannot hurt you either. Taemin shook his head. The probe is not just telepathic. It uses technologies we do not fully understand. Ancient sciences from the first telepathic civilizations. It may find ways to access any mind, even yours. Jiwoo picked at the strange food, thinking. Over the past 3 weeks, the human had begun to understand just how different human consciousness was from the telepathic norm. While other species had evolved to share thoughts and emotions freely, humans had developed in isolation, each mind locked within its own skull. But that isolation had created something unique. Human minds had learned to simulate the thoughts and feelings of others without actually experiencing them. They could imagine complex scenarios, predict behavior, and solve problems by running mental experiments that existed only in their imagination. To telepathic species, this ability seemed almost magical. Can I ask you something? Jiwoo said. When you connect your minds with others, can you pretend? Can you imagine being someone you are not? Daeho tilted his head, confused. Why would we pretend when we can simply share real thoughts and experiences? But what if you want to explore an idea that might be dangerous? Or understand how an enemy might think? Or create something completely new that has never existed before? Sojin's skin flickered with interest. You mean fantasy? Creating false experiences in your mind? Not false, Jiwoo said, struggling to explain. Hypothetical. What if scenarios? Humans do it all the time. We imagine conversations before they happen. Picture ourselves in different situations, explore ideas that might be impossible in reality. Taemin's aggressive posture softened slightly. Your mind creates experiences that never happened? And you can control these imaginary experiences? To some extent, Jiwoo said. It's one of the ways we learn and prepare for new situations. We run mental simulations of possible futures. The 3 aliens sat in silence trying to process this concept. Their telepathic abilities allowed them to share real experiences and access actual memories from others. The idea of deliberately creating false experiences seemed unnecessary and potentially dangerous. No wonder we cannot read your thoughts, Daeho said finally. If your mind is constantly generating imaginary experiences alongside real memories, the mental landscape must be incredibly complex. As they finished their meal, Master Baksu's presence appeared at their table. The floating crystal pulsed with ancient wisdom and barely concealed worry. Jiwoo. His mental voice spoke directly to the 3 telepathic students while addressing the human aloud. I must speak with you about tomorrow's test. Jiwoo looked up at the beautiful, terrifying crystal. Yes, Master? The mind probe has never been used on a human consciousness. We do not know what will happen when it attempts to examine your thoughts. There is a possibility that the experience could be harmful. Harmful how? Master Baksu rotated slowly, casting shifting light patterns on the table. The probe works by forcing mental connections that do not naturally exist. For telepathic minds, this is traumatic but manageable. For a mind that has never experienced telepathic contact, we simply do not know. Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. The human looked around at the 3 alien friends who had begun to accept the strange, closed-minded creature in their midst. Master, Jiwoo said finally, I came here to learn. If this test is part of that learning, then I want to take it. Even the test chamber was a perfect sphere carved from a single massive crystal. Neural pathways traced glowing patterns across its inner surface, pulsing with the collected mental energy of centuries. At the center, suspended in midair, hung the mind probe nexus itself, a towering structure of interconnected crystals that seemed to bend light around its edges. Jiwoo stood with 47 other students in the chamber's outer ring, waiting for their names to be called. The human had never felt so small or so isolated. Every other student in the room shared subtle mental connections, offering each other comfort and courage through telepathic touch. Jiwoo felt their fear alone. Master Baksu floated near the nexus, his crystal housing reflecting the ancient device's glow. Around him, 6 other masters maintained the testing protocols. Their consciousness merged into a single observing entity that would monitor each student's experience. Students, Master Baksu's mental voice reached everyone except Jiwoo, who heard his words spoken aloud. Today you face the most sacred trial of our academy. The mind probe will examine not just your telepathic abilities, but the very structure of your consciousness. Some of you will emerge stronger. Others may not emerge intact. All of you will be forever changed. The first name was called. A young ethereal student drifted forward, her gaseous form shimmering with nervous energy. She approached the nexus and placed her consciousness directly against its surface. Immediately, tendrils of light erupted from the crystal structure, wrapping around her mental essence. Through the chamber's neural pathways, all the telepathic students could sense what was happening to her. The probe dove deep into her memories, forcing her to relive the moment she had first achieved physical form after centuries of existence as pure thought. The trauma of suddenly having boundaries, of being trapped in a single perspective, washed over her again. But the probe pushed deeper, beyond the trauma, to the growth that followed. It found the strength she had developed through learning to balance ethereal nature with physical existence. The examination lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, she collapsed but remained conscious, her form glowing brighter than before. "Passed," Master Baksu announced. The process continued. Student after student approached the nexus. Some passed, emerging exhausted but strengthened. Others failed, their minds unable to handle the probe's invasive examination. They were carried away by medical personnel, their consciousness intact but severely damaged. So-Jin was called forward. Jiwoo watched the blue-skinned Vorthok approach the nexus with visible terror. Her empathic abilities meant she had felt every previous student's experience, as if it were her own. She already knew exactly how much the probe would hurt. The tendrils of light wrapped around So-Jin's mind, and immediately her blue skin flared bright with pain. Through the neural pathways, the telepathic students felt her worst memory, the day her empathic abilities had first manifested. She had been in a hospital visiting her injured father, when suddenly she felt every patient's pain, fear, and despair at once. The experience of absorbing 100 different agonies simultaneously had nearly destroyed her young mind. The probe forced her to live through it again, but this time, it pushed her beyond the trauma. It showed her how that terrible experience had given her the ability to heal emotional wounds, to carry others' pain so they could be free of it. The probe revealed depths of compassion she had never recognized in herself. When the examination ended, So-Jin collapsed, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. "Passed," Master Baksu announced. More students followed. Taemin's name was called, and the red-skinned Nexari strode forward with false confidence. His species prided themselves on mental dominance, but Jiwoo noticed that his skin had lost some of its usual aggressive glow. The probe's tendrils wrapped around Taemin's consciousness, and immediately his confident posture crumbled. His deepest shame was exposed to the examining minds, the moment he had discovered that his telepathic abilities were not natural gifts but the result of illegal, genetic modifications his parents had performed. When he was an infant, everything he had believed about himself, his natural superiority, his species' genetic perfection, his right to look down on others, was revealed as a lie. The probe pushed him to face the truth that his enhanced abilities were no different from technological tools. What mattered was not the source of his power, but how he chose to use it. Taemin barely survived the examination. When it ended, he fell to his knees, his red skin flickering between colors as his entire sense of identity restructured itself. "Passed," Master Baksu announced, though his mental voice carried concern for the young Nexari's psychological state. Finally, only 2 students remained, Daeho and Jiwoo. Daeho of the Zenthari, Master Baksu called. The silver-scaled student approached the nexus with steady determination. He had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, building mental defenses and strengthening his telepathic abilities. As the probe's tendrils wrapped around his consciousness, he initially maintained perfect composure. Then the probe found what it was looking for. Daeho's worst memory exploded through the chamber's neural pathways. Every telepathic student felt his experience. Standing on his homeworld's surface as their second moon cracked apart, destroyed by a mining accident that sent massive chunks of rock crashing into populated areas. Millions of his people had died that day, including his entire family. He had survived only because he was visiting a distant continent for a telepathic training program. The probe forced him to experience the helplessness again, the crushing guilt of being absent when his people needed him most. But it pushed deeper, revealing something Daeho had hidden even from himself. Part of him was grateful to have survived. Part of him was relieved to be free from the expectations and limitations of his homeworld culture. The revelation of his unconscious relief at his family's death nearly shattered his mind. His silver scales turned almost black as he fought to maintain mental coherence, but the probe continued, showing him that survival without guilt was not betrayal but necessary growth. His relief did not diminish his love for his lost family. It freed him to honor their memory through his own achievements. When the examination ended, Deho fell forward, catching himself with shaking hands. His scales slowly returned to their normal silver, but they now carried flecks of brighter metal that had not been there before. Past, Master Baksu announced. Now only Jiwoo remained. The human walked forward on unsteady legs, approaching the towering crystal structure that had broken so many minds before. The nexus pulsed with ancient power, its crystalline facets reflecting light that seemed to come from inside consciousness itself. Jiwoo of the humans, Master Baksu announced, his voice carrying uncertainty for the first time. You may still withdraw from this test. We do not know what effect the probe will have on your non-telepathic mind. Jiwoo looked back at the other students. Deho, Sojin, and Taemin watched with expressions of concern and curiosity. They had all faced their deepest fears and emerged changed. Now it was the humans' turn to face something no member of their species had ever encountered. I understand the risks, Jiwoo said aloud. I want to proceed. Master Baksu's crystal rotated slowly. Very well. Place your hand on the nexus interface and try to remain calm. The probe will attempt to establish mental contact through any means available to it. Jiwoo reached out and touched the crystal surface. It felt warm, almost alive, humming with energy that seemed to respond to the human's presence. For a moment, nothing happened. The probe sent out its usual telepathic tendrils, searching for mental contact points that simply did not exist in Jiwoo's consciousness. The examining masters waited, uncertain how to proceed. Then the nexus began to glow brighter. The probe, designed to work with telepathic minds, encountered something it had never faced before. A consciousness that could not be read through normal means. Instead of giving up, the ancient device began to adapt, searching for alternative ways to access the human's thoughts. It found them. The chamber's neural pathways suddenly erupted with chaotic energy. The other students gasped as they felt something completely alien touching the edges of their telepathic awareness. It was like trying to understand a language that followed no recognizable rules. A form of consciousness that operated on principles they had never imagined. The probe had found a way into Jiwoo's mind, but the human mental landscape was unlike anything in its ancient database. Instead of the ordered telepathic structures it was designed to navigate, it encountered something that seemed almost random. Layers of memory mixed with imagination, emotions tangled with logic, conscious thoughts running parallel to unconscious processes. Master Baksu's crystal began to pulse with alarm. The probe was sending back data that made no sense. Human consciousness appeared to be a chaos of contradictory information, yet somehow it functioned as a coherent whole. Then something went wrong. The probe, lost in the maze of human thought, began to feedback on itself. The masters monitoring the test felt their own consciousness being pulled into something they could not understand. The chamber's neural pathways flared with unstable energy as the HFY. Inside Jiwoo's mind, the probe wandered through landscapes that should not have existed. It had been designed by the first telepathic masters to navigate ordered consciousness, minds that stored memories in clear categories, emotions in distinct channels, and thoughts in logical progressions. For thousands of years, it had examined millions of telepathic beings from hundreds of species. All of them followed similar patterns. All of them made sense. The human mind made no sense at all. The probe found itself in a memory of Jiwoo's childhood on Earth, but the memory was wrong. It showed the human as a child playing in snow, but mixed into the scene were elements that clearly came from imagination. Flying creatures that Earth did not have, colors that Earth's sky never showed, emotions connected to events that had never happened but felt completely real. The probe tried to separate real memory from fantasy and discovered it could not. In human consciousness, the two were impossibly tangled together. Every real experience was layered with imagined alternatives. Every emotion was connected to both actual events and hypothetical scenarios the human had never lived through. Deeper in the mind, the probe encountered something even stranger, memories that contradicted each other. It found the same childhood event stored in 3 different ways: as it actually happened, as Jiwoo wished it had happened, and as the human feared it might have happened. All 3 versions felt equally real to the human consciousness. The probe's ancient programming began to malfunction. It was designed to identify the single truth in each memory, but human memories appeared to contain multiple truths simultaneously. Every experience carried with it a cloud of alternative possibilities that the human mind treated as equally valid. But the strangest discovery was yet to come. As the probe went deeper, trying to find the core structure of human thought, it encountered vast regions of mind that the human itself could not access. Unlike telepathic species who were aware of their entire consciousness, humans seemed to carry huge amounts of mental activity that happened below the level of their own awareness. In these unconscious regions, the probe found symbols and patterns that followed no logical rules. It discovered emotions attached to memories that the human had forgotten, fears connected to events that had never happened, and deep knowledge about subjects Jiwoo had never studied. The human mind appeared to process information in ways its owner never realized. The probe tried to make sense of this chaos and found itself becoming lost. Every time it thought it understood how human consciousness worked, it encountered new contradictions. The mind seemed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, processing emotions, memories, sensations, and abstract concepts all at the same time without any clear hierarchy. But the most disturbing discovery was what the probe found when it tried to identify the boundaries of Jiwoo's individual consciousness. In telepathic minds, the self was clearly defined. Each being knew exactly where their thoughts ended and others began. Mental barriers kept individual identity separate and distinct. But in the human mind, the probe found something impossible. Jiwoo's consciousness contained accurate models of other people's thoughts and feelings. The human had somehow learned to simulate the mental processes of others without any telepathic ability. Jiwoo carried internal versions of friends, family members, teachers, and even strangers, complete with their probable thoughts, likely reactions, and emotional patterns. These simulated consciousness operated independently within the human's mind, offering advice, criticism, and perspective that came from Jiwoo's understanding of how others would think. To the probe, this looked like telepathic contact, but it was something entirely different. The human had developed the ability to model other minds through observation, imagination, and empathy alone. It was a form of mental connection that required no special abilities, only intelligence and the willingness to imagine experiences beyond one's own. The probe had been built to understand minds that shared thoughts directly. It had no framework for understanding a consciousness that achieved connection through simulation and imagination, instead of telepathic contact. As the ancient device struggled to process these discoveries, its feedback began affecting the physical world. In the test chamber, cracks spread across the Nexus's crystal structure. The neural pathways carved into the chamber walls flared with unstable energy as the probe's confusion created cascading errors in the Academy's telepathic systems. Master Baksu and the other examining masters felt their own consciousness being pulled into the chaos. The probe was transmitting its confusion directly into their merged awareness, forcing them to experience the impossible contradictions of human thought. What is happening? Master Yunmi's mental voice carried panic. The probe cannot process the data it is receiving. The human mind follows no telepathic logic, Master Baksu replied, his ancient wisdom struggling to comprehend what he was experiencing. It appears to be conscious in ways we never imagined possible. Throughout the academy, telepathic students and teachers began to collapse as psychic shockwaves radiated from the failing nexus. The probe's confusion was spreading through every mental connection in the building, forcing telepathic minds to experience fragments of human consciousness that they could not understand. Daeho fell to his knees, his silver scales flickering rapidly as his mind tried to process memories that belonged to someone else, but felt real enough to be his own. Sojin collapsed as her empathic abilities overloaded, feeling emotions that had no telepathic source but carried genuine human intensity. Taemin screamed as his carefully ordered Nexari consciousness encountered the chaotic creativity of human imagination. But Jiwoo stood calmly at the center of the destruction, unaware that anything unusual was happening. From the human's perspective, the probe's examination felt like a particularly vivid daydream. Ji-woo was experiencing flashes of memory mixed with imagination, emotional insights combined with random thoughts, exactly the kind of mental wandering that humans called consciousness. It felt completely normal. The human had no idea that the most advanced, telepathic device in the galaxy was destroying itself trying to understand the routine operation of a non-telepathic. Find inside Ji-woo's consciousness, the probe made one final discovery that shattered its remaining ability to function. It found that human consciousness was not just chaotic, it was deliberately chaotic. The contradictions, the mixed memories, the tangled emotions were not flaws in the human mind, they were features. Humans had evolved in a world where survival required constantly imagining new possibilities, planning for uncertain futures, and adapting to changing circumstances. Their consciousness had developed to handle multiple contradictory ideas simultaneously, because reality itself was often contradictory and uncertain. Where telepathic minds sought clarity and order, human minds thrived on ambiguity and complexity. They could hold opposing beliefs at the same time, feel contradictory emotions simultaneously, and make decisions based on incomplete information. This ability to function within chaos was not a weakness, it was humanity's greatest strength. The probe, designed to examine ordered telepathic minds, could not cope with a consciousness that was designed to be disordered. Every time it tried to categorize and clarify Ji-woo's thoughts, the human mind generated new complexities and contradictions faster than the probe could process them. In the test chamber, the Nexus began to emit a high-pitched whine as its crystal structure reached the breaking point. Master Baksu desperately tried to shut down the examination, but the probe had become trapped in a feedback loop with the human mind. It could not find a way out of Ji-woo's consciousness because it could not understand the patterns it had encountered there. Emergency protocols. Master Baksu broadcast to all Academy personnel. Evacuate all telepathic beings from the testing area. The Nexus is becoming unstable. But even as the ancient masters fled the chamber, they realized that shutting down the probe might not be enough. The device had been running for thousands of years, accumulating the mental patterns of countless telepathic civilizations. If it was destroyed while connected to Ji-woo's mind, the explosion of psychic energy could damage every telepathic being in the Academy. They needed to find a way to safely disconnect the probe from human consciousness. But to do that, they would need to understand how human minds worked, something that none of their species had ever achieved. The answer, when it came, would require the three students who had befriended the strange human to risk everything on a plan that went against every principle of telepathic safety they had ever learned. But first, they would have to wake up from the psychic shock that had left them unconscious on the test chamber floor. Daeho opened his eyes to chaos. The test chamber's crystal walls were cracked and bleeding light. The Nexus hung in the center of the room like a dying star, its structure fracturing as internal energies threatened to tear it apart. Around him, telepathic students and masters lay unconscious, their minds overwhelmed by the impossible feedback from the trapped probe. Only Ji-woo remained standing, perfectly calm at the center of the destruction, unaware that the galaxy's most advanced telepathic device was destroying itself, trying to understand human consciousness. So Jin. Taemin, Daeho called, crawling toward his friends. His silver scales ached from the psychic overload, but he forced himself to move. Somehow he understood that they were the only ones who could fix this disaster. So Jin stirred first, her blue skin flickering weakly. What? What happened? I felt so many emotions that made no sense. Feelings without telepathic sources. Taemin groaned as he regained consciousness, his red skin pale and confused. The human's mind, it operates on principles we never imagined. No wonder we cannot read their thoughts. The three students helped each other stand, staring at the failing Nexus. Through the Academy's neural pathways, they could feel Master Baksu and the other instructors desperately trying to shut down the probe from a safe distance. But their efforts were failing. The device had become so entangled with Ji-woo's consciousness that disconnecting it might destroy both the probe and the human's mind. We have to help, Daeho said. We are the only students still conscious. Help how? Taemin asked. We barely survived experiencing fragments of human thought. How can we possibly enter that chaos directly? Sojin looked at Ji-woo, who stood peacefully unaware of the crisis happening around them. Maybe the answer is not to fight the chaos, but to understand it. Ji-woo told us that humans imagine experiences that never happened. What if that ability is exactly what we need? Through the broken neural pathways, Master Baksu's desperate mental voice reached them. Students, you must evacuate immediately. We cannot control the probe's feedback. When the nexus fails completely, the psychic explosion will damage every telepathic mind in the academy. Master, Daeho projected back, we want to try something. We think we can help Jiwoo and save the probe. Impossible. The human mind is beyond our understanding. Any attempt to make telepathic contact will only increase the feedback. Not telepathic contact, Sojin said, her empathic nature giving her insight the others lacked. Human-style contact, through imagination instead of direct mental connection. Before Master Baksu could forbid it, the three students joined hands and approached the failing nexus. Instead of trying to establish traditional telepathic links, they attempted something that would have been considered impossible a day earlier. They tried to think like humans. Daeho closed his eyes and imagined what Jiwoo's consciousness might feel like from the inside. Instead of seeking clear, ordered thoughts, he pictured a mind that held multiple contradictory ideas simultaneously. He imagined experiencing memories mixed with fantasy, emotions connected to hypothetical events, and thoughts that followed intuitive rather than logical patterns. Sojin used her empathic abilities in a new way. Instead of feeling Jiwoo's actual emotions, she imagined what the human might be feeling based on body language, facial expressions, and vocal tones. She simulated human emotions using her own emotional capacity, creating an internal model of Jiwoo's mental state. Taemin struggled the most, his species' preference for mental dominance making it difficult to accept chaos and uncertainty, but he forced himself to imagine having thoughts he could not control, emotions he could not suppress, and memories he could not organize. He pictured a mind that found strength in confusion rather than clarity. Together, the three aliens created something unprecedented, a telepathic simulation of human consciousness. The effect was immediate and startling. Instead of trying to read Jiwoo's thoughts directly, they began to understand how human thoughts might work. They experienced the strange pleasure of holding contradictory beliefs, the creative power of mixing memory with imagination, and the adaptive strength of thinking in multiple directions simultaneously. Most importantly, they began to understand how to navigate human mental landscapes without getting lost. I can see it, Daeho whispered, his scales brightening. The human mind is not chaotic at all. It has patterns, but they follow emotional and intuitive logic instead of telepathic logic. The probe is lost because it keeps trying to categorize and clarify, Sojin realized. But human thoughts are supposed to be complex and contradictory. That is how they work properly. We need to guide the probe out, Taemin said, understanding dawning in his aggressive features. But we cannot drag it. We have to teach it to move through human consciousness the way humans do, by accepting uncertainty and following emotional patterns instead of logical ones. Working together, the three students projected their simulated human consciousness toward the trapped probe. Instead of giving it direct commands, they showed it how to navigate by intuition rather than analysis, how to accept contradictory information without trying to resolve it, and how to find pathways through chaos by following emotional resonance rather than logical structure. Inside Jiwoo's mind, the probe suddenly encountered something it could understand. Three telepathic minds that were thinking like a human. The ancient device, designed to learn and adapt, began to follow their example. Instead of trying to categorize Jiwoo's thoughts, it accepted them as they were. Instead of seeking single truths, it embraced multiple possibilities. Instead of demanding logical progression, it learned to move through human consciousness by following the flow of emotions and associations. For the first time in its existence, the probe began to understand a non-telepathic mind. The discoveries it made revolutionized its understanding of consciousness itself. Human minds, the probe realized, were not defective telepathic minds. They were a completely different form of intelligence, one that achieved complexity and creativity through methods telepathic species had never developed. Where telepathic minds sought to share thoughts directly, human minds had learned to understand others through simulation and imagination. Where telepathic consciousness valued clarity and order, human consciousness thrived on ambiguity and the creative tension between contradictory ideas. Most remarkable of all, human minds had developed the ability to change themselves deliberately. Through imagination and willpower, Humans could create new neural pathways, modify their emotional responses, and even alter their fundamental beliefs. They were self-programming consciousness, capable of evolution and adaptation that went far beyond biological limits. As the probe learned to navigate human thought patterns, its feedback to the telepathic masters changed completely. Instead of chaotic noise, it began transmitting organized data about a form of consciousness that was utterly alien, yet undeniably sophisticated. In the test chamber, the Nexus's crystal structure began to stabilize. The dangerous energy fluctuations smoothed into steady pulses as the probe established proper communication protocols with Jiwoo's mind. Master Baksu and the other instructors felt the change immediately. Through the Academy's neural networks, they began to receive the probe's analysis of human consciousness, and it changed everything they thought they knew about intelligence itself. Remarkable, Master Baksu transmitted to his colleagues. The human mind operates on principles we never imagined. It achieves mental capabilities through non-telepathic methods that may be superior to our own in many ways. The examination of Jiwoo continued, but now it proceeded smoothly. The probe explored human memory formation, discovering how imagination and reality combine to create flexible, adaptive recollections. It studied human emotional processing, finding systems that could hold contradictory feelings simultaneously without psychological damage. It analyzed human creativity, learning how the mixing of memory, fantasy, and logical reasoning generated genuinely new ideas. When the test finally ended, Jiwoo opened their eyes and smiled at the three alien friends who had saved both human and probe from mutual destruction. "That was interesting," Jiwoo said casually. "I feel like I understand myself better now." "Did I pass?" Master Baksu's crystal rotated slowly, reflecting newfound respect for the strange, impossible human mind. "Jiwoo of the humans, you have done more than pass our test. You have taught us that consciousness can take forms we never imagined. The mind probe has learned more from examining your thoughts than from thousands of previous tests combined." In the days that followed, everything at Nexus Academy changed. The mind probe test was redesigned to incorporate human-style psychological principles, alongside traditional telepathic methods. Students learned to value emotional intelligence and adaptive thinking as much as pure telepathic power. The Academy began accepting applicants from non-telepathic species throughout the galaxy, recognizing that intelligence took countless forms. Daeho, Sojin, and Taemin became the first telepathic beings to successfully simulate non-telepathic consciousness, earning them recognition as pioneers in a new field of interspecies psychology. Their friendship with Jiwoo deepened as they continued to explore the differences and similarities between telepathic and human thought.